Good evening, and welcome back to the weird and the wonderful with Strange Bones. That's me. And tonight we are doing a carry-on. Hey Freddie, welcome, welcome. So we are carrying on from Saturday night's live with our examination more in depth of one of the cryptids, which is to say, werewolves. And we'll do a very fast recap for where we got up to, and then we will go on and look at a slightly more modern set of werewolves to see what is said where and why and how, just for our fun enjoyment and curiosity, because after all, the channel is for the weird and the wonderful. And we cannot be weird and wonderful without weird and wonderful things. So welcome, welcome, welcome to you all. Welcome, Pharaoh. I hope you are all ready for an interesting evening. And we shall see what we can do. So I hope you are ready for an interesting evening. It has suddenly become incredibly cold again, because after all, why not? And as a result, you will forgive me for keeping my blankie attached. It's definitely chillos and wet and nasty and all the things that we don't like. But there you go. Nevertheless, I hope you have a good cup of coffee, that you are ready for an interesting chat and discussion, and we shall take this further on with more of the interesting stuff. So, start a little bit late. Snowflake, hello, how are you? I hope you are in fine and fabulous form. Always good to have you guys on board. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Snowflake is on holiday. Well, that is pretty cool. And welcome to Jacqueline. So, Mark Swar, thank you so much for the likes. I do appreciate that immensely. Remember, guys, just as I'll start off, on this channel, there we go. That's wonderful, Snowflake. I'm glad to hear that. I shall look forward to that. I remind you we have only one rule on the channel, and that is don't be rude. People who are rude and disruptive get kicked off. But other than that, we enjoy a great deal of all sorts of agreement, disagreement. Hey Rance, I absolutely do remember you, and I am very glad to see you here. Hey Jacqueline, how are you doing?
I'm okay, thanks. Yourself?
Good, good, good. I'm glad you made it back for the second edition on werewolves. So, glad for that. And remember, guys, lots of comments, like, share, subscribe, do all the good things, because that's what keeps us going. Much thanks to Mark Swartz for the rose. Do appreciate. And I'm very glad to hear that, MJ, you are doing great. It's always good to have the familiar faces. So that's wonderful. So, Jacqueline, you were here for the last live, so you will know most of what I'm going to go over very quickly. But with that, we're going to just touch on what we got thus far before we progress. So we're talking werewolves, and we established that stories of werewolves began as far back as ancient Babylon, which is pretty far ago. I mean, right off there, that's about 2,000 years BC, which is pretty impressive. We know that we get the word for werewolves originally at the lycanthrope from the Greeks, from the king Lycaon. And we know that both the Greeks and the Romans were big on werewolves. We also discovered that apparently you can become a werewolf in one of 4 ways, 2 of which are good and 2 of which are very much bad. So from curses or through some fairly dodgy spellcraft, or through being born to it, or through, what was the 4th one? Do you remember, Jacqueline? Curse was the first, spellcraft was the second, the 3rd was being born, and the 4th,
No, I can't remember.
I don't recall now, but there were 2 good ways and 2 bad ways. They will turn up again. Where do I live? I live in KZN in the Drakensberg. So I don't know where you are, Snowflake, MJ, but so we know that very often it was the gods doing that made you a werewolf. So Lycaon, for example, he was made a werewolf because he tried to feed a person to Zeus in disguise, who didn't take well to it and used lightning to destroy Lycaon's 50 sons. He was a busy lad. And then he cursed the king. So clearly a bad thing in that regard. We know that it was Jupiter in the Roman story, the god Jupiter, that went ahead and did the cursing there. We know that in Norway and Iceland and the other Chthonic regions, they also had quite a serious interest in werewolves as well. Oh, that's cool, MJ. Yeah, I used to be in Benoni for quite a while. But not anymore. I moved. We find that the stories were further pushed on in the Chthonic regions in the Alfhednar, which is kind of like a berserker, but it's the other variety. As I mentioned, there are 4 kinds of berserker in total. And one of them is the Alfhednar, the wolf warriors, which were connected to all sorts of things. And the Alfhednar were very real. They did exist. But whether or not they could turn into wolves is a different question. But they are mentioned in the Volsung saga as well as the Havamal, I believe. So we saw that as quite a bit. And then having established the sort of more ancient history, we are now moving on to the more modern, and we found that in South America you have the lobizon, or the luison, which is a South American werewolf. And the myth is mostly in the areas of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And it is connected possibly to the Portuguese bringing it over to a certain degree, which makes sense because in those areas you don't really get wolves. We will find in South America we have other therianthropes. So this is connected as well to the 7th son of a family. And as we know from our previous examinations of mythology, witchcraft, and all the rest of it, the 7th son is always considered to be a bit of a dodgy character with strange powers. So if you were a seventh son of a family, on the night of a full moon, especially if it was a Friday for some reason, you're almost guaranteed to turn into a werewolf. Now, the origin of the Louison legend is in Guarani mythology. The Guarani are the indigenous people of Paraguay that says that there were 7 monsters, and of the 7, the last one is Louison, who had a horrendous appearance and was known as the god of death. This mixed up with the Portuguese views of werewolves, and Lobizon became a werewolf. So a mix there. However, we do know that in Mexico you have the Nahual, which didn't come from the European colonizers at all. It was an original sort of a thing, which is quite interesting. It's one of the slightly more good werewolves. Now, certain of the Mesoamerican, South American Indians believed in what is a guardian spirit, that in certain occasions truly powerful people could even become, and they are varying varieties of creatures, not just wolves. So that's where your Nahual comes from in that regard. In North America, of course, you've got a great deal of the European influence going in there. And of course, you do get wolves in North America. So that's become quite serious in modern movies and all the rest of it. I think just about all of us of a certain age watched American Werewolf in London and The Howling and all of that. And of course, everybody must have heard of Michael Jackson's Thriller. It's you know, I saw a thing the other day saying how old it was, and it's getting pretty dated, which maybe shows how old I am. We won't go there.
There's another werewolf movie called Afflicted.
Yes, there is. I looked that up.
That was a really good one as well.
Yes, I when it comes to movies like that, I like it when your villain type thing or creature is properly bad. I think that's why I never got on with what's it called, that stupid movie with glittery Twilight.
Twilight. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, no, sorry. If your villain isn't properly villainous, then really, where are you going? Now, one thing which came up, which is a bit of a mix-up to a certain degree, because we know that you have in Native American, that's North American folklore, you have the Wendigo. But the Wendigo isn't really a werewolf. It's kind of different, and in many ways, like the Skinwalker, I would say it's closer to our view of the Tokolosh more than it is a werewolf. We always have fun, MJ. You should join in. Can I send you an invite? It would be cool to have you on as well. So, yes, but one thing that they do have in common, of course, is malevolence and possible cannibalism. Though, does it count as cannibalism? Are werewolves different to humans? Well, maybe not. Hard to say. So, you find that the loup-garou, which is obviously a French import in many ways, mixed with the local boogity-boos, and managed to become something more as time went on. So you do get a mix of stories in that regard, which I suppose is expected in that regard. Why is that being crazy? I don't know. Little notifications popping up and going, "Heh." Nevertheless, okay, so we can then say that this obviously moved on, because as we know, there's a lot of French influence going down south to Louisiana, and we are going to definitely be talking tonight about the evolution of the loup-garou with what they call the rougarou, which is the bayou werewolf in Louisiana folklore. So that is also an evolution. We know, of course, there's a lot of stories around Germany, and the original Red Riding Hood does seem to have a certain amount of werewolf connection to it, which might be true from Grimm's fairy tale, which, as we know, is a particularly awful original tale. That's one thing that we found, is the original fairy tales were really quite horrifying, not like the modern and nice Disney ones that we get now. Ron3, thanks for sharing the live there. That's awesome of you. I do appreciate. But there's another German story, and according to the story, a soldier said that this happened to his grandfather. The grandfather went into the forest to cut wood with a friend and a third man, but there was something strange about the third man, and he said his grandfather couldn't tell for sure what it was. After they'd done their job and become tired, the third man said, why don't we take a nap just to rest a bit? And they thought, that's a good idea. We'll have a go at that. So they went and had a lie down for a nap. But the grandfather was a little bit suspicious, so he pretended to fall asleep, but kept his eyes slightly open and kept an eye on the third man and his strange behavior. The third man, after a moment or two, looked around to see if the other two were sleeping, and feeling confident that they were, he put on a belt. Now remember, that's one of the ways to become a werewolf, is to use a special magical belt. And he became a wolf, but he didn't resemble my blah, 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 blah. Okay, he didn't resemble a natural wolf. He looked a little different. He ran off to a nearby field where he ambushed a horse and devoured it completely. The man came back and took off his belt and lay down again in human form, pretending to sleep. After a while, they woke up and they returned to town, and the third man complained that he had a bit of a stomach ache. As they entered the town gate, his grandfather whispered into the man's ear, "When one devours an entire horse..." But before he could finish the sentence, the third man said, "Had you said this to me in the forest, you would not be able to say this now." So the story apparently was passed down and is one of the most oldest popular legends of werewolves in Germany. And I must admit, it's one that I hadn't heard before until I started doing research. But the idea of werewolves, as we know, is very strong. In the last live, we discussed Peter Stump, who was absolutely convinced he was a werewolf as well. And he was executed for it. And he committed large quantities of attacks and unalivings of people over 25 years. We discussed briefly the stories about the French werewolf, the loup-garou, which killed apparently about 80 people in one of the regions there. And stories go that between the 16th and 17th century, more than 30,000 people were executed for being suspected werewolves. So they took it very seriously. And the last known one was in 1573, which wasn't that long ago, historically speaking. Now, here's where we start moving on to the interesting ones. And this is the Irish werewolf from around the 12th century at least. And according to the story, a priest accompanied by a boy was travelling from Ulster to Meath, two of the Irish counties. And one night in the woods, a wolf approached the priest, and as it came nearer, it began speaking of God. The priest became terrified and couldn't believe what he was seeing and hearing. And the terrified priest asked the wolf what kind of creature was he that had the shape of a wolf but the words of a man. And the wolf told the priest that there was only one other creature like him, and it was his wife. And they were native people of the Ossory, cursed by the Saint Natalis for some ancient sin. And it compelled two Ossory people, one man and one woman, to take the wolf form and remain in that form every 7 years for a while. After that period, the next two would take their place, and the prior two would return to human form. The wolf told the priest that his wife was sick and dying, and he asked the priest's help to give last rites to his wife, because while they were in wolf shape, they were nevertheless human. Baffled but still terrified, the priest followed the wolf, and when they found the ailing wolf, it thanked the priest for agreeing to administer the last rites. But sensing hesitation in the priest and assure him that he wouldn't commit blasphemy by giving the dying wolf the last rites, the male wolf peeled the skin of his ailing companion half off with his claw, revealing an old woman underneath. So the priest did his duty, and the woman returned to her wolf form. Now, we also know in Irish myths there is a particular group of people, a clan, that apparently can turn into wolves, but they can do so naturally. They are born that way, and they are good, and they protect people and are known to bring food to the hungry in harsh winters. So it seems that the Irish werewolves are all good, which is quite the opposite to werewolves of other places. Now, in the Slavic countries, we see that we have a different view of werewolves yet again. The Vukodlak from the Slavic countries and the Czech countries, such as Serbia and Croatia, they're really quite nasty. Vukodlak basically means wolfskin, so it shows the common understandings thereof, and very often, because they are considered to be bad, they are therefore related to creatures of undeath, and therefore we get the modern link between vampires and werewolves that comes from the Slavic side, which you don't get with the Germanic or the French view of werewolves, which is quite interesting to show how it's developed in that regard. But we have quite a lot more than just that. We know that quite a few of the different views of werewolfism have come from, shall we say, older places, but some of the most interesting stories don't come from older places. So I take you back to America, the War of 1812. We've all heard of it. It was the British-American War. It was a very big deal, and it had a lot to do with making America what it is today. But it seems that sometimes they struggled in their war, and they didn't do too well against the enemy. And when things got really bad, according to some of the stories, the supernatural got involved in the conflicts. And we know that quite a few of the stories from the war involve ghosts and worse. And even today, a number of the battlefields that were big deal in the War of 1812 are said to be particularly haunted. So we can find things like the books The Ghosts of 1812 and ghost stories from the War of 1812 that have collected a whole lot of these stories, especially in the Niagara region, which saw very heavy fighting. And from that time as well are the stories of the Tennessee Bell Witch. And Andrew Jackson himself, who was a famous fellow from that time, encountered a spirit in 1820 and said he would rather fight the British again than face it. But it seems that werewolves were said to be involved in the War of 1812 and actually had some kind of connection to that story per se. And there is a story at one stage of a battle that took place where it wasn't the soldiers that fought it. They were approaching the enemy and they stopped for the night, and they knew that the battle the next day they would probably lose, and it was going to be a particularly tough one. And so they were obviously not sleeping so well, as they could see at a distance the enemy troops all arrayed and ready. But that night a terrible howling went up, and the sounds of a great battle. And in the morning, when they went to see what had happened, the enemy were all dead, torn apart. Wow. And it seems that werewolves had gone and fought instead. So it implies, at least in the story, that some of the soldiers were not all that they appeared. And of course, as we know from the stories, at least the mythology of it, werewolves are supposed to be much stronger, faster, and almost impossible to kill. So that would be quite a difficult foe to have to deal with. But 1812 is not the only time when werewolves got involved. And of course we see this taken forward because the idea of werewolves in 1812, as you know, Marvel picked up on that, and our favorite Wolverine is said to have fought in the War of 1812. If you look at his origin stories, he and his brother were born in that region at that time. So they've carried on the idea into modern media. But there is much more to see in that regard, because another war story, which is rather fascinating, that speaks on both sides of the Second World War. There was a story among some saying that in Finland, there was a group of soldiers that they were trying to halt the Russians coming in through a particular part, and coming through the mountains, they would have to go through a path within the mountains. And the Finns were very weakened at that point. They didn't have too many men. They were stretched out. It was very tough. And the winter was very, very harsh. And this is from the Winter War. And the Soviets were coming down. And there was about 200 or 300 Finnish soldiers and about 2,000 Soviets. And the Finns retreated through the valley and then dug in on the other side in the hope that maybe they could manage to hold out by bottlenecking the Soviets. But that night, as they were waiting for the Soviets to come through, again, you had all kinds of howling and a terrible battle noise coming through. And in the morning when they went to see, they walked up through the Kabini Mountains, and the entire Soviet detachment were found dead with the bodies torn apart. And they said that it was the Vironsusi, the local werewolves, that had gone in and taken the entire lot out. And so the Finns survived. Now, we do know as well that it wasn't only the Finns that said there were werewolves involved, and there was in fact a special German detachment of paramilitary fighters known as the werewolves, and they really did exist. And of course there was a certain amount of superstition and stories about them to say that maybe they were more than just soldiers, because they didn't fight with the standard army. They worked behind enemy lines with guerrilla attacks and sabotage, especially in the last months of World War II. And they were supposed to be unseen and unheard, which is much like what a wolf would be expected to do in its attacks. So there were German werewolves as well. And they were not involved in Finland, so it wouldn't have been during the Winter War there, because that was between the Soviets and Finland entirely. So a different thing. Now, we do know that the local Sami people had warned the Soviets from entering the area and had told them it's werewolves that will take you out if you come in. And of course the Soviet soldiers said, no, we don't believe in that rubbish. So what do you think, Jacqueline? Was it werewolves or?
Probably.
I like the idea of it have been werewolves, but the Sami.
There's proof of mythological creatures.
Well, this is the thing. A lot of people say that if such things exist, there would be proof of. But every time proof turns up, they go, no, but it must be something else. So, who is to say?
Oh.
Yeah.
Where there's smoke, there must be fire.
That's what I say. I am a great believer in werewolves. I think werewolves are awesome. So it pleases me. Yeah. But an interesting thing is that the werewolves are absolutely one of the German special forces. And what's very interesting is that it is a known fact that the Nazis at a point became very, very interested in the occult and all kinds of things like that, and were certainly trying to find ways to use the occult to help win the war. Now, there's a device known as the Wolfangel. Now, a Wolfangel is a specialized tool that was used actually as a wolf trap. It's a rather odd-shaped hooked cross of metal that would be attached to a chain and inserted inside a large piece of meat, which was supposed to then be eaten by the wolf and catch the wolf. And the Wolfangel was used as the pennant or the sigil, insignia of the werewolves, the specialized paramilitary detachment, a resistant force that would operate behind lines. And they did really exist. They were created by the genius of Joseph Goebbels. Now, do be aware that though I say he was a genius, and he absolutely was, he wasn't the good kind. I will put it to you that he was very much the bad kind of genius. So he put his... Yes, he was known by his nickname as the Poison Dwarf. He was apparently quite short. But Goebbels was not a nice fellow. And he even had a whole propaganda thing called Radio Werewolf, weirdly enough. So it seems that there was quite a lot of interest and even active attempts to find ways to become werewolves. Who knows, maybe they did. Now, we know that even Adolf Hitler was not immune from that, and his headquarters, his field headquarters that he had in Vinnytsia in Ukraine was known as Werewolf, and he used to call himself the Wolf. And we also... Say again?
In the concentration camps, didn't the scientists do some sort of... I don't know, maybe I remember incorrectly, but didn't they do some experiments to try and change...
Oh yes, they absolutely did. Very, very much so.
I'm not sure if there was anything to do with werewolves, but I think I heard somewhere.
Well, the testings, shall we call them, just to be nice about it, absolutely covered quite a lot of things. In preparation, for example, for their foray into the war with Russia, they wanted to test the human ability to withstand cold, and they would take people and subject them to extreme cold temperatures and throw water on them and stuff in freezing temperatures to see how long they would last, in order to know how well their soldiers could do. So they got up to a lot of things, and they weren't afraid to go the whole way. Interestingly, we do know that the name Adolf Hitler, actually comes from the Old German word meaning wolf. And we also know that his military headquarters on the Eastern Front was Wolfhansa, the wolf's lair. So it seems, who knows, maybe Adolf was a werewolf. That would explain a great number of things in many ways. And they had Operation Werewolf in 1944, which was started by Heinrich Himmler. And as we know, the top people in the Nazi thing, besides Adolf himself, was people like Goering, Goebbels, and Himmler. They were the top ones that did a lot for the German side, and some of them were a little bit off their nut, to be honest. Goebbels was probably the worst, but Himmler wasn't a lot better. So we see that it's all through World War II. There were hints of it in World War I as well. We find it in the War of 1812. So it seems that werewolves had definitely gotten involved. So perhaps this is proof of their existence. But that alone is not enough, because we also need to speak on things that happened in Russia. The Kirov wolf attacks, a series of wolf attacks on people that occurred from 1944 to 1954 in the 9 districts around the Kirov Oblast of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, which resulted in the passing on of 22 children and teenagers between the ages of 3 and 17. All the attacks occurred between April and December, which was the wolf's cubbing season. And some said these were not natural wolves. The official explanation is that because of varying environmental things and the spread of people, that in the Kirov Oblast region, the wolves became very, very bold. And there had to be the conscription of Kirov hunters into the Red Army. So obviously they were not around in the area to protect people. Furthermore, all the firearms were taken from the villages because they were needed in the war. So the wolves became very, very bold. And as we know, wolves are very intelligent. They know what's going on and they adapt fast. So during this period, quite a lot of cattle and dogs, which the wolves usually fed on, were also reduced because they were taken for the war effort. So 200 wolf packs were counted in the area's forests, and sightings of wolves, even in the city streets, started to become common. And they were sometimes even seen sleeping in the Zrekny city park in broad daylight, and showed no fear of humans at all. Now, these things got really out of hand. There were a number of different attacks. They just ambushed the kids, attacked them and bit them and dragged off the bodies, etc., etc. So it got it really serious, out of hand, on a number of occasions. And again, it's during each year, during a specific time of year, the cubbing season. And rumors started going around that these wolves were not just wolves, that perhaps they were too intelligent in that regard. Now, over the next 3 years, Kirov hunters, with the help from a number of hunters from Moscow, managed to kill 1,520 wolves, which was very difficult because the war was going on. But nevertheless, this barely touched anything. And the attacks continued, and so did the fear and the stories. And it seemed that the wolves had zero fear of people and were just too clever. They knew when people were coming with guns and just disappeared then and returned when the hunters were not around. And then the story starts becoming weird, because it seems that there was another attack, but for some reason a young lad protected the old wolf, thinking that she wasn't to harm, and later on he was out picking berries and, bless you, was attacked by bandits, I suppose, thieves, whatever, and they were driven off by the wolf with 3 large cubs. So it seems that these wolves knew. So this went on with stories like this coming back with overly intelligent wolves, and it went on until 1954, where the last attacks were recorded, and thereafter never again. So a strange situation. But what about Louisiana? Well, we know that in Louisiana you have a mix of people. And you have the Cajun and Creole folklore, which has been influenced by the French. So the loup-garou. Now we know in French, loup is wolf. So the loup-garou means a wolf man. But as things went along there, they've developed into, again, your more modern view of a werewolf. Not somebody that turns entirely into a wolf, but somebody who becomes half and half. A half man, half wolf type thing, as we see in most of the modern movies. So that's where we get that image from. Now, of course, some say that it is a person who practices black magic. Some say no, it's in fact a Christian under certain experiences that becomes a werewolf. Some say you can become one if you are cursed. The stories vary. And it's a swamp-based wolfman. And it's said that you can reveal it by making it bleed, and then that somehow will show you that it is a werewolf. But doing that might have very dangerous consequences. It's basically a large dog-like or wolf-like creature with a human body and a canine head, but very hairy. And the stories go back to the 1500s at least. Sometimes used as a cautionary tale, the rougarou, to scare kiddies, because that's what you do. Now, the Christian version of the rougarou was said to be one that if you didn't observe Lent properly, then it would come and find you. So if you are a lapsed Christian or you fail in your proper observances, then you would become the target of the rougarou. So it teaches you to stay a good Christian. The other version is that you could become cursed by practicing black magic or other forbidden acts, and that makes you turn into a rougarou. So the curse can be broken if you can make the rougarou bleed, maybe. The person who attacks the rougarou must, however, keep the creature's identity a secret for a year and a day after making them bleed. And then their curse will be broken. However, there is a chance that if you don't keep it a secret, you will become a rougarou. And of course, during that year's period, you become a target for that rougarou. Now, we know that these are stories that come from Louisiana, especially around the Acadania areas. But there are all kinds of different versions of what this means and what this is. So they say that the name is a twist from loup-garou, that is a linguistic corruption, if you will, based within the Cajun language. It's very popular, and of course now it's part of all sorts of Mardi Gras and everything among the Cajuns to have rougarous running around, so it's become very popular. It's said to live in the swamps. It's said that during Mardi Gras, the real rougarou come and join in, and because everybody's dressed up, you'll never know. They might be there among you, which is pretty cool. We know that there's a lot of supernatural stories in Louisiana, what with the voodoo and all the rest of that, and some of the great vampire stories come out of Louisiana as well. So it's no surprise that we've got the rougarou. Now, how do you stop one? Well, they say that if you put 13 small objects by the door, the rougarou can't come in because it's not terribly intelligent and it can't count beyond 12. Though
Yes, I remember that.
I'm not sure I'd want to try that one out just in case it was wrong.
Yeah, we'll have to sit there and time time.
Yeah, it's like the one that if you throw down rice in front of a Chinese vampire, it has to stop and count every grain so you can get away. I'm not sure I'd want to try it. Much thanks for the sharing of the live there. I can't pronounce Cyrillic very well, so I can't pronounce your name, alas, but thank you nevertheless. Now, some stories vary as to how you can rank how bad a werewolf is. Some say they're actually pretty good as long as you're a good person. Some say they're absolutely awful and it doesn't matter at all who you are, they will take you out anyway. We know that rougarou is the Ojibwe name for a hairy man who appears due to danger or disruption in the community. So it's kind of said to be the result of when things go wrong, then one turns up to cause trouble until it's sorted out. Now, some say that it's like a Bigfoot. You know, they're spoken of and blamed for things being wrong, if you will. It's a way of saying that something's not right, not that they really believe it. Others say no, they really do believe that these things do exist and might cause trouble. So, hard to say. But with all of that, we've come to realize a number of important things. First of all, right the way back in Babylonian times, and obviously in the Babylonian regions, which now don't really exist, but the Middle East, you had werewolves. We know that in Greece, you had werewolves. In Rome, you had werewolves. In France, the loup-garou is a werewolf. In Germany, you had werewolves. In the Slavic states, you had werewolves. In Nordic folklore, you had werewolves. In Mexico, South America, you had the Nahual and the Luison werewolves. In Finland, the Noidanlukos are werewolves, and of course they're said to have fought within the war. All through the Middle Ages in Ireland, Britain, and all of that area, you had werewolves. One of the modern things is that you can become a werewolf by being bitten. Now, this is something that I find interesting because in none of the stories does it, until the modern era, does it imply that being bitten will make you a werewolf. The older ones are all either you got cursed, be it by a person or by a god, or you did something truly awful to become a werewolf, or you were born a werewolf. So the idea of contagion seems to be a modern thing. Hard to say. I've never been bitten by a werewolf, so I couldn't tell you. We do know, however, that there are a lot of other animals that you can become as well. So therianthropy is a very real thing in that regard. Now, we need to talk about silver and the full moon, because these are the two things very much associated. Why the full moon? Well, the link actually exists between silver and the full moon, because silver is the metal of the moon. And it started out with the moon, the idea that it is at the full moon that the wolf will change or come out, if you will. It is very much connected to old superstitions and old beliefs that regard the full moon as a time for strange and supernatural events and possibly evil events as well. Now, because silver is the metal of the moon, it became said that the only way to harm one of these creatures is to use the metal of the moon against them. Hence, a silver-coated sword or silver-tipped arrows, which in the modern world became a silver bullet. So that's where that came from. And we know that silver turns up in a lot of things. The idea that if you put two mirrors, it makes a portal, that only comes from the idea that the original mirrors were backed by silver. So I don't know if it would work with a modern mirror at all. I think it has to be a silver-backed mirror, so the very old mirrors. Though maybe not. Maybe it's the image alone that counts. Hard to say. We do know that it feeds into vampire legends, saying that because of the silver backing, a vampire doesn't have a reflection in the mirror because of the fact it's metal, silver metal. So there is that. Hard to really say if it's definitely the case, but we do know that there are several things that are said to either protect you from or harm these creatures, such as wolfsbane, aconite, and things like that. So herbs that you could put onto your weapons so that they would actually cause harm. Some stories say that if you harm the werewolf, you will know who they are the next day, because the person would have the same injury. And there are plenty of stories where hunters have gone out and shot a wolf in the leg or something, and the next day somebody in town was seen walking with a limp, and clearly they were the werewolf. So perhaps we know that the different stories imply at least that they are stronger, faster, very, very tough, able to jump even up to 2 or 3 stories into the air, and that they like to gather. And there are certain places around the world that are said to be meeting places for werewolves. And of course, they exist in the sort of places that people shouldn't really go at night because of they are dangerous, such as like the middle of the Black Forest in Germany at night would not be a good place to go. Not so much for werewolves, but just because, well, it's a giant forest and getting lost would be bad. And back in the day, you had wolves and bears and all kinds of other things in there, which would make it dangerous. But if the supernatural were there as well, werewolves and shrat and such, it would make it even more dangerous. There are places in many countries where they say the werewolves gather and the spirits gather. And of course, this links up to stories, as we said, in the Welsh mythology, where some of the fairy are said to be werewolves in that regard, and we read of that in the Mabinogion. So there's a lot of stories all over with a lot of advice, and we do know as well that somehow cold iron might be linked. Now that comes more from the British Isles, because they have a vested interest, as it were, in the fairy. And we're not talking the little Tinkerbell types either. The fairy in British folklore, and we will do a deeper dive into them as well, are quite tall. The Tuatha De Danann and their light court, and of course the children of Anun and the dark court are quite large and somehow very terrifying in and of themselves, and fairy are afraid of cold iron. It can harm them greatly, and that's one of the reasons you would hang a horseshoe above your door, not just for luck, but to ward off the fairy. So perhaps the saying that cold iron can harm a werewolf is related to that, but definitely silver. I do hate it when it pops up this little thing that says, we've detected no activity, when we're like, active. It always does that after a certain time. So there's the beginnings, if you will, of werewolfery. But then we now need to ask, if that's werewolves, what other things can we talk about? Well, different countries do indeed have different creatures that are said to be their version of the werewolf. So, just pull up my notes there. So we spoke of lycanthropes, and as we have said, lycanthropes are only wolves, from the word lacan, meaning a wolf. But a therianthrope is an animal shifter, so somebody who is part human, part animal, and it need not be a wolf. So you've got varying varieties. So what makes them what they are, I suppose, is the fact that they have within them a hybrid of human and animal. And they appear all over the world again, from the gods of Egypt to rock art in South Africa. And of course, in the modern age, we now have whole communities of what they refer to as Therians and otherkin, where people identify as non-human in varying ways, either partly or fully. And you can be all kinds of things as an otherkin. And there is a strong online community as well for Therians. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, there's a lot out there. You can be any animal you please, it seems. But this, in
Really?
this, yeah, if you wanted to, you could be a cat. Cats are popular. Well, in modern anime, a popular theme, if you will, is the characters that they refer to as Neko-chan, the cute little cat girl.
Oh,
So yeah, that Neko is Japanese for cat, and chan is the female suffix. So Neko-chan means cat girl, just as Neko-san would mean cat boy, I suppose. So we have that. Now, many of these stories are hybridal. In South Africa, we have human antelope figures. We've got, of course, the human hyena figures. And they go right across Africa. There are stories, however, of far more than just that. We have in India not only werewolves, but those who are part person, part snake, the naga. And we will have to look into those as well. We've got the cat folk, including the Welsh Silicans, which are the cat she, part person, part cat, and all magic. One of my absolute favorites, in fact. I do love the Silicans. Then, of course, you have were bears, were sharks among the Polynesian islands, and more. Now, generally, you would refer to something just as a shapeshifter if it's capable of going into many different shapes, whereas you would refer to them as a therianthrope if they have one particular creature that is who and what they are. Now, the other kin, which is very, very contemporary, a therianthrope or therian, is someone who identifies rather than actually somebody capable of changing into. And the distinction, they say, is that they have within them the spirit of the creature. It's an animal identity that is important. And they say it's a kind of species dysphoria, the feeling of being in a wrong body, but not even the right species, I suppose. Therians can identify with living animals, extinct animals, mythical animals, and even fictional animals. So you could be a My Little Pony. I never said it. Now, werewolves are the classic therianthrope for most stories, but we see a lot of others in many different creatures in that regard. And we can say that therianthropy might link, for example, to shamanistic rituals and things, similar to the Ulfhednar, where they were said to take on the spirit of the wolf as they went into battle. But then again, maybe it is more than that. I think that it is fair to say that there is such a thing as clinical lycanthropy in the modern age, where they speak of it being a psychiatric delusion and isn't real at all, but where somebody particularly believes that they can in fact change. Well, yes, we of course, as you mentioned in the last live, you have the Japanese kitsune, which is the fox shifter. We've also got the swan maidens from France, which are quite important in that regard. There are, in Indonesian mythology, boar shifters, so a kind of giant pig. We know that one of the Japanese yokai is the bakaneko, and that's kind of where your idea of the cats being important comes from for the Japanese, because it is literally a cat shapeshifter. So think a werewolf, but a cat. So you've got that going on. Among the berserker, as we saw, you've got the berserk, which is a bear warrior, the ulfhednar, which is the wolf version. And then I'm really not going to try and remember the Scandinavian words for the others because my brain's not that good. You have the boar warriors, who were actually not only famous, but very, very, very important to society because they were considered to be the stable equivalent of the berserk, where the berserk went completely out of their skull and madly went into battle. The boar warriors were incredibly loyal and ferocious, but not crazed. And then, of course, you had the raven warriors, who were literally assassins, experts in poison and more. So 4 kinds of berserk. We see that this has developed in the modern age that is big in anime and manga within the Japanese. So Kimono Mimi, your cat girls, which are part and part. Among the Inuit, all the way up there in the north, they speak of the goose wife, tales of women that can turn into geese. And if you're clever enough and you can steal away their goose skin while they are bathing in the lakes, they have to come home with you and be your wife, and they are very beautiful and skilled. But if they ever get their skin back, they are gone, 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 and they might leave trouble behind for your bad actions. We also know that you have the Joroguno, which is, again, a Japanese yokai. And the Jorogumo is a beautiful, beautiful woman some of the time, but the rest of the time it's a cannibalistic, awful, evil spirit. So perhaps not the kind of woman you want to marry. But they transform into a stunningly beautiful woman so that you do. And then, of course, they get you.
There was a story
Yeah.
about somebody got lost in the forest and they found a silver fox, and they followed it to like an abandoned hunting house.
Yes.
And when they went in there was a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she was very beautiful. And she offered for this man to have a place to sleep that night. She made him food and everything. And then he went to bed. Oh, it was a couple, a man and his wife.
Okay.
And then she gave them a place to sleep. And then in the middle of the night, she went and woke the man up and tried to seduce him. And he said to her, no, that he doesn't feel right. He's got his wife, he's in love with her. And then she just said to him, oh, so you really love your wife? And he said, yes. And then she says, well, I think you better go. So she kind of kicked him out in the middle of the night, and he didn't understand why. But in fact, she was actually like a cannibalistic demon. She was going to eat them if him and his wife, if he decided to sleep with her.
Well, interestingly enough, the kitsune in Japanese mythology are known to be guardians of the good, and they look after the fields, but they are also very, very moral. So because he didn't betray his wife, he therefore was considered good and allowed to go. Had he failed, he would have been punished. So the kitsune do test and trick people to see if they're going to do as they're supposed to. And if you fail in that regard, then of course things go wrong for you. So that's a very common theme. Huge thanks to Anna for those likes. I appreciate it greatly. Remember, guys, we do rely on you to like, share, subscribe, send gifts, and all the good things so that we can keep things going. Moving along, though, we are going to talk about the Kebu Keoiba, a creature that you find in India, which is a were tiger. According to legend, they are skilled and powerful priests with a great deal of magic that can turn themselves into more. And we will absolutely look a bit further into that one, because I like the idea of were tigers. We also have some fairly evil ones, such as the Scottish Kelpie, which are horse demons, and they turn into horses to try and force you to get onto their back, and if you do, you become stuck there and can't get off, and then they ride themselves off into water and drown you. So they're a kind of shifter in that way. The kitsune, as we've said, is a very important and powerful magical creature, and it is said the more Jaden, hey, sorry you can't join, but it's good to see that you've stopped, and it's always good to see you stop by. I hope you're in good form at the very least there, sir. So good to see you. But yeah, the more tails that they have, the older they have become and the more powerful they have become. So you get the legends of the nine-tailed fox out of that. And there are shrines to this day to the kitsune. And if I remember my mythology correctly, they might be related to Guanyin, but I might have got that wrong. I think it's Guanyin. We also have the Kushtaka, which are from the Tlingit people on the Pacific Northwest coast of North America, which are also people that can turn into other creatures. You have the Mestria out of Greek mythology, where they could turn into other things, very different animals and such way. We've spoken already of the Nahual. There is the Nekomata, which are your cat shifters. Your nine-tailed fox, which is just the English word for kitsune. You have the Pricolid, which is a werewolf that's part vampire, which, yeah, that's not a mix I think would be good by any means. You have the Puka. The Puka is Celtic, English, and Channel Islands, which we get in the modern Shakespearean story, A Midsummer Night's Dream, as Puck, which were little people that can also turn into rabbits and such. So they come and check on. They can be either good or bad, dependent on you for the most part. You also have the Saz. Saz was the mother of Oisin by Finn McHale. So in Irish mythology, from stories like the the Tainbo Culain. She's either the daughter of Bovdar, the king of the She of Munster, so part fairy, and she was said to be able to change into varying creatures as well, which was a common theme in stories like the Tainbo Culain. If you don't know what the Tainbo Culain is, to translate from the Irish Celtic, it's the cattle raid of Cooley. And it's the story of the great battle to own the two great mythical bulls. And the legend prophesied by the Druids was that no man can own both the white and the brown bull. The one bull was owned by Ulster, and the other bull was owned by Connaught. And Maeve of Ulster was the queen, and she said, well, I'm not a man, so I'm going to own both. And she led her armies to attack Connaught. And there's a whole collection of stories involved around that, including the Irish version of Hercules, if you will, Cuchulainn, and Druids getting up to all kinds of issues and all sorts of things. But the net result was the two bulls fought when the armies fought, and the bulls killed each other, so nobody owned them in the end. So Maeve failed. But nevertheless, it's a truly epic tale. And of course, if you enjoy a good rollicking fantasy adventure, it's a fine one to go through. Now, in Chinese culture, one of their shapeshifters is half person, half scorpion, which doesn't sound very good at all. It's this, when in her giant scorpion form, she's the size of a horse. So, yeah, that puts you off just a little. Among many of the marine places around all over Europe, in fact, but Celtic and Norse, you have the Selkies. And the Selkies are seal people. So humans and seals, which is pretty cool. And there's lots of stories around that. Now, you do have among the Navajo the skinwalkers. Now, I'm not entirely sure if it's a specific animal, but nevertheless, they are capable of changing. And in their case, it's definitely a witch that does the changing of themselves. Just as in Romanian mythology, the strigoi are able to do that as well. And they are somehow connected to vampires in many ways, the strigoi spirits. Among the French, you have the swan maidens, beautiful, beautiful women that are actually swans, and have a feathered cloak to allow them to change. And they turn up in a number of classical stories. We have one which I'm really going to do my best, the Tehuelpuki. Yes, it's Mesoamerican. A cross between a shapeshifter or therianthrope and a vampire witch from the Mexican region, so it would have been Aztec, which is interesting. Then the other ones, just to counter your scorpion shifters from China, among the Japanese you have the spider shifters, half beautiful woman or man, handsome man, and half spider, and they can apparently change between one of three forms: full spider, half and half, or person. And they are, of course, one of the famed yokai, which are basically supernatural beings. But a truly awful idea as well. So we're hyenas, the Buddha, all over Africa. Witches that can change into hyenas and might be connected also to Smiths for some reason, which is interesting because in my family, our family name is Smith.
Oh.
Just saying. Then, of course, you have the weird jaguar. The Olmecs started them. They were warriors, much like the Ulf Hednar, but jaguars instead of wolves, that were said to be able to turn into jaguars. But there are also stories of other creatures, weir parrots and weir bats. And there's some amazing stories of the weir bats in South America that if you don't like bats will truly terrify you. But if you do, they're freaking cool. So Batman is real in South America. Now, there is the idea as well among some of the Northern American tribes, like the Lakota, where they speak of white buffalo woman, which is basically a specific woman who brought the 7 sacred rites to the Lakota people, and apparently she could turn into a white buffalo. So we've definitely got a good list of different, and that doesn't even cover everything, because you also have weir coyotes in the deserts in the Americas. So there's a whole plenty, but I want to now briefly talk about the other kind, because just as you get werewolves, you get wolf weirs. Now, what is a wolf weir? Instead of a person who can turn into an animal, you have somebody who is originally an animal who can turn into a person under certain circumstances. So the other way around, and they are often in stories where they are protectors of the land against people who come to mess things up. So sort of the ultra eco warrior. So keep in mind that not all werewolves might be werewolves. Perhaps they might be wolf weirs. Who's to say? Now, just to look a little bit further in, the Kebu Keoiba from India. So human form, but with a tiger's head by and large, said to originally have been a particular man, a priest named as Kaboi Salang Maiba, and he turned himself into a ferocious tiger. And as punishment for his pride, the gods made it that he couldn't completely turn back and became stuck halfway through, because he went out at night hunting for food and planned to eat this old woman that he found. But she said, "Look, I'm old, I won't be tasty. You should go and eat this beautiful young woman instead that lives over there." Now, he went to find the woman that was indicated, and she was the only sister in a family of 7 brothers. And the old woman told Kebu that her brothers had gone to work and she was alone. So the old woman helps Kebu trick this woman into opening the door to her house, and Kebu kidnaps the woman in question, and her brothers return and find her missing, and they ask the old woman, and she tells them about Kebu. So they get their weapons together, and of course it begins an epic tale of how they go to find their sister. But it turns out, instead of eating her, he forced her to become his wife, and they live in the forest. But eventually they do find their sister, who has given birth to a child. So they plan her escape, and the story goes on and on and on, and they manage to get the girl out. But the important bit is that the woman and the child and the brothers escape. They kill Kebu, and of course you start to wonder what happened to the child.
Oh,
Yes. And therein comes the rest of the story, because he is more than just a child. So absolutely. Now, the kitsune, as we know, is the Japanese famous one, very, very important. Turns up in a huge amount of different Japanese stories, with all sorts of warnings and teachings involved, which is pretty cool in that regard. So some shapeshifters are considered to be very, very good and very important. In some places, people can turn into birds in Greek mythology. Callisto and Circe were involved in some of that, where Circe, of course, turned a whole lot of people, mostly men, into pigs, which is possibly a way of pointing something out. But there you go. There is that. If you're into good feminist stories, that's a good one for you. Your swan maidens, as we know, turn up all over the place, as do geese. And then, interestingly enough, the male version of the geese people apparently are very wise. And if you can find one of them, they can help you out. In America, of course, you have the stories of the jackalope, which may or may not refer to somebody who can turn into at least a horned rabbit. I don't know a lot about the jackalope, I will be honest with you. There are also a number of stories of were lions, obviously in mostly Africa. In the North Americas, you've got were cougars, which is their version of a lion. So we have that going on. Lots and lots of different versions of things that could be. So shape-shifting is strong throughout the world, and we find it in so many different cultures, and believed, not just thought about or made into stories, fully believed by the cultures in which they were found, to the degree that it turns up in law, normal law, that you could be accused of being a shapeshifter in this way, a therianthrope, and even executed for it. We know that Arachne in Greek mythology became a spider. Nyctimene became an owl. There are certain stories of Lincus, the king Lincus becoming a lynx, which is a kind of cat. We know that there are stories of gods turning people into roosters, even. Yes, you can become a giant chicken. Birds are very popular, from the hoopoe, a swallow, a nightingale, so all kinds of birds, goldfinches. We know that bears were popular as well, and there was one poor person that was cursed to be turned into a fly, which is, yeah. Now, one of the things I've always found a bit dodgy with Greek mythology is that many of the people that were, especially the women, that were cursed with therianthropy by the gods, were cursed not because it was their fault, but because somebody else had done something bad. So Arachne fled Ares to the temple where she was a virgin priestess to avoid being basically raped by him. And her punishment for running away from him was to be turned into a spider. We know that Philomena was taken by Terrace, and she was turned into a bird as punishment for this. I mean, it wasn't her fault. Callisto was turned into a bear because she was taken off by Zeus. And we all know what Zeus was like. I mean, he could never keep it in his trousers. And in fact, Mia was turned into a fly by Selene because she fell in love with somebody that Selene desired. So we know that Medusa was turned into the monster that she was because she was taken by Poseidon in Athena's temple. So in many cases, I have to say that it was the fault of the gods, and people ended up being punished for it, which is pretty awful. But many of the older myths are pretty awful in that regard, which is kind of sad. I don't really know. One of the weirdest therianthropes I came across was the tale of Narcissus, who was too vain, and so he was cursed to become a flower.
Oh.
Yep. A very annoying person who wouldn't stop playing his music was turned into a cicada. Yes, the noisy bug that keeps chirping. So that one I can work with, you know. Pretty fair. I'm not too sure how to take that, but, well, there you go. So lots of weird sort of ones as well. We do know that the Huldrafolk in Norse mythology appear as people, but are actually able to turn into cows. And you'll know them because they have their tails, their cow's tail stays on and it's hidden under their clothing. So the Huldrafolk are like that. Now, in Celtic mythology, we've got a whole collection of weird ones. Lud ap Silcuth, my Welsh is not good, turned his wife and attendants into mice. So there was that. Then Masfab Mathwanwi and Gwithian were turned into flowers because... No, they turned flowers into a person, creating Bluith. So that was because of varying weird things. You have to read the whole Mabinogion. But later on, she betrays her husband, Lulogith, and he gets turned into an eagle. And then she is turned again into an owl. So you can bounce between all kinds of shape-shiftings in some things. We know that punishments is from the gods. It's definitely one way to become a therianthrope. And Gwythian, for example, in the Mabinogion, for things that he did, is turned in succession for a whole year each into a stag, a pig, and a wolf. So right there. And their children that they had also became animals in that regard. So it seems you can be born a therianthrope in some way. Now, we know one of the greatest bards. Now, remember, the bards in Irish mythology might be musicians, but they were considered to be sorcerers and were very often druithin as well. And the greatest of them all was Taliesin, and he was the one that was said to have taught Merlin the magician. But he could do all kinds of things in that regard. So Taliesin was, but he did it on his own. He was a sorcerer. He did it to himself when he wanted to. Scarlett, welcome. How are you doing? I don't know if we should mute that. They are being very busy. Yeah. I'll just turn that off. I don't know what they're quite doing in there. But nevertheless, welcome to Scarlett. But they were searching for something in a drawer by the sound of it. Okay, so yeah.
No, I was just...
Yeah. So the Celts have a great deal. We've spoken of the Selkies, which are not just Scottish. They go all down the coasts to the Welsh and the island folk as well, the Isle of Man and the Isle of Skye, and of course many of the Boogatiboos, if you will, the supernaturals, use the ability to disguise themselves in human or animal form to trick people in ways to get them. The Ishwisig were famous for it. Now, Tam Lin, in one of the famous Irish tales, was captured by the Queen of the Fairies, and he is changed into all kinds of creatures before he's finally rescued and gets back to being human. So the fairy and the Tuatha De Danann can get up to all kinds of mischief in that regard, which is clearly an issue. Now, Teutonic types had quite a few as well. We've spoken of the Huldra, we've spoken of the Berserk, the four Berserks, but not only that, the most famous of all of the shapeshifters, of course, is Loki, who can change not only form but gender, and at a certain stage turned himself into a female horse and thereafter gave birth to Sleipnir, the fastest horse to ever exist, and turned into a she-wolf at one stage to give birth to Fenris, the evil wolf that will cause Ragnarok. So you've definitely got that. We had one guy who, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but he managed to upset Odin, Svipdagar, who was turned into a dragon. So there is that. And eventually he was slain by a warrior, which maybe is a bad thing, I suppose. We know that Freya had a cloak of falcon feathers that allowed her to turn into a falcon, and her protege otar could turn into a boar. So we had quite a few different stories. They also had a number of werewolves in different stories, so that was definitely a thing. Dragons, generally, it seemed only if you were greedy you would end up a dragon for some way. Now, Scandinavia has got all kinds of things. Most famously, they're maras, which are all female, half wolf, half human. Boys do not get to turn into maras, but the boys will get to become shaman. The girls become werewolves, which is apparently better in their culture. So it's a good thing. Remember, sometimes werewolves are good and sometimes werewolves are bad. In the Indian, you have your... Okay, I'm going to try it. Wish me luck. Ichishtari Nag, which is the cobra people. And it's a blessing to be able to become one of these. We do know that the yogis were supposed to be able to turn into all kinds of different animals. They have the reverse version, which is a story of a dog that can become a woman. So it was a dog weir. There is an entire clan in Kerala where the men are able to transform into all kinds of different animals, dependent on their totem. Among the Armenian mythology, you have the Nang, which is a woman that can turn into a seal, but it's kind of a vampire as well, which isn't very good. And she can also turn into a snake. Sounds a bit off-putting. We do know that the Filipino aswang is also a reverse kind of thing. It's kind of a demon, but it can turn into a person to live among you and hide. But it can also change shape into a varied other creatures as well. So, and then there's ways of changing into things, or if you have special talismans, the anting-anting or the bertad, which allows you to change when you want to. The Tata people have the yuksha, which is again the reverse, a snake that can turn into a beautiful woman.
I'm so sorry, I'm gonna have to go. My
All
phone is
good.
about to die.
That's fine, because we are almost at the end. So, yeah, we will
Yeah, it's like
round it off quick. And then if you don't make it, you won't have missed much. But it's been awesome having you on. I do
no, it was very
appreciate it.
nice. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been awesome. Cool. Good night. So the Somali turn themselves into hyenas, as do Ethiopians, and a number of other places around Africa, including South Africa. I'm not even going to try it, sorry. It's a San word, and it involves clicks I can't pronounce. But they have ones that can turn themselves into a praying mantis, very important to the San, elans, caterpillars, and other things as well. You also have things like the Pakwaji from Wampanoag folklore in North America that appears as a normal person but isn't. Now, interestingly, it seems that you can get dolphins. Huge thanks for the likes there. I do appreciate that. Dolphin sounds a good one, and is the cause of illegitimate children, it seems, because the men are very seductive and very musical, so they can seduce all the ladies. Dolphins, there you go. We know that in Trinidad and Tobago, you have the Ligahu, which may be influenced by the Loup-garou, and again is a kind of werewolf in a way, very much associated with anybody that practices African magic. So an influence from there. Argentina and Chile has the Nahual, we've spoken of that. So at the end of the day, just about every country in the world has some kind of shifter in that regard, and some of them are amazing. The stories are really quite impressive and great if you're interested. And I will say this as a close off, that strange as it might find, normally I like the old stuff and not the modern, but if you've ever gone and looked up The World of Darkness, it's a game set in the modern world for the most part, though not always, involving all of these things. They've gone and gathered the mythology of just about every culture. So their versions of all the shapeshifters are semi-correct. They've tweaked it a little for the game. But the mythology is largely correct to quite a fair degree. And they really have gathered into one place some of the best stories about all the different shapeshifters that are out there. And if you're into role-playing games and that kind of thing, The World of Darkness is truly brilliant. And if you didn't know, the Underworld movies are in fact based on The World of Darkness, which includes Vampire the Masquerade, which is what World of Darkness and Underworld, what Underworld is. It's the Vampire the Masquerade. So if you're interested in more, look up World of Darkness. White Wolf, I think, were the creators of it. But it was a truly amazing set of games and absolutely well worth looking into in that regard. A very good one, which I think, I'm probably over-fascinated with werewolves, but you've got to admit it's a truly awesome cryptid. But they are not the only cool cryptids, and I was very much asked to do some research and look into, see what I can find about some of the cryptids of Africa, including especially the Tokolosh. So I think we are going to look at some of the cryptids of Africa in the next live. So join me then, and I hope you've enjoyed tonight. It's been a particularly good one, I think. I've certainly had a lot of fun. I hope you have too. I look forward to seeing you again in the next time, and that you will bring in a lot of different comments and more. More interaction, guys. More. We love interaction, and send tons of likes because we need it to keep the channel going. So we rely on you. But with that said, thank you so much for joining me, and we will end in exactly the way that we always do when we say that it's now late, so sleep deep, sleep sweet, but sleep with one eye open, and maybe keep that holy symbol near at hand, because It seems, after all, there are many things in this world that go bump in the night, and some of them might go bump for you. Good night.